Welcome back to Gearheads. I'm finally back from my tropical vacation. Sorry for the interruption in our car stuff, but that vacation was much needed. Back in the Texas heat, trying to readjust, trying to get my head back into the game. This week we have such a cool project though, I can't even wait. We are pulling the motor out of this car. You guys remember Hunch? He was the one that helped us paint the roll cage in our other video for the Panda Hatch. Well, he's been boosted about a year and a half. He's got a pretty decent setup in here, but he really wants to make it over that 400 horsepower level. And I think doing these upgrades hopefully get us there. I'm so in love with you.
You got me down again.
Hold up. I'm so in love with you.
You got me down again.
Well, day two. Got the motor out of the car pretty easy, but tomorrow we need to have this all the way down and pistons in it. Alright, so now it's time to put this motor together. I've got his new rods. Actually, they're not new rods, they're the factory rods that we stuck on the new pistons. And there's really no trick to that except for if there happens to be an oil squirter in your rod, just to make sure to orient it the same way it was from factory. In this particular rod, it doesn't actually matter. Now basically, I'm going ahead and putting the rings onto the piston itself. I've already sized these in the block. Here's a cool little tip or trick, I guess, if you're doing your own ring assembly, is you line the oil ring groove, the very first one with the bumps in it. You line the little, when it comes together, there's two edges that'll be pointed down, and then I put my thumb over it, and then I go 90 degrees and put another ring. And once I've got that one on and it kind of locks it in place, then you flip it 90 to the other side and put the ring. That way none of the ring grooves on the oil ring assembly line up, and you get the best oil wiping possible. Now when you move on to this second ring, you notice I just pointed to that spot. There's usually writing on your rings. You'll notice it if you pay close attention, a writing or a dot. That stuff, the rings, you want to assemble that with the writing up pretty much every time I've ever seen. There's usually, if you're getting a good aftermarket set, there'll be instructions. They'll talk about the shape of the ring itself and which way it's oriented, but every time I've ever seen, more or less, the writing goes up towards the top of the piston. So the only other advice I have at this point is not to overstretch out the ring, because they're brittle, especially the second ring. They will crack if you bend them out too far. I like to kind of slide the open ends over the top of the piston into the groove and then just push the back slowly over to only stretch it the very minimum amount possible. They do sell a ring expander tool. You know, I just didn't particularly have one today. I've had one in the past, I just couldn't find it. But I've done it enough to know that if I'm just careful and don't overstretch it, you know, I won't crack a ring. The bad thing about cracking a ring is you typically have to replace the whole set because they typically don't sell one. So be very careful with that. You notice I'm pointing out that even on the top ring, there'll be an indicator mark and you'll line it, you know, towards the upside of the piston. So with that being said, you know, also don't overstretch that top one. It's not as brittle as the second one. You're usually most likely to break your second ring, but the top one would still break for sure. So once you get that oriented, you know, the only other thing to keep in mind is, you notice I'm wiggling it back and forth, making sure everything's in the groove and slides around nice. There's no, you know, debris or impedance, which there really shouldn't be on a new piston anyway. This is just engine assembly lube. This is nothing fancy. I got it at, you know, just the parts store. If you have time to order some good stuff, I believe my favorite is the red Cleveite stuff. I've used that for like 10 years, and I've sometimes assembled a motor that somebody didn't pick up for, you know, 6 months, and it's just wrapped up in plastic. They fire that thing up and it's always been good. If you'll notice, I only put a coating on the top of the bearing. You'll want to install your bearing into the rod cap without putting any lube on the underneath side at all. You'll actually want to make sure the underneath side is completely clean, you know, brake parts cleaner, debris and dust free completely. So probably the biggest trick with engine assembly is be as clean as possible and pay attention to all your mating surfaces. Now right now I'm just using like your typical snap-on you know, ring compressor tool, and I'm fitting it up to make sure that it fit right. But now to actually assemble it, even though the skirt's coated and it's a, you know, it's a nice piston or whatever, you gotta pre-lube the thing a bit. Fill those ring lands up with some oil. That way everything can move around nice when you get it in there. Coat the skirt. You don't want to scuff up, you know, if you just put a hone on the block, you don't want to scuff it all up pounding it in for the first time. Obviously those rings spread out and have quite a bit of tension, so you'll want them to have lube initially. So right now I'm orienting these ring landings so that they the ends of the rings are not in the same position. Obviously the two upper rings create your compression for the cylinder. You're gonna want those oriented in different places so they don't line up. There's a possibility you'd be down slightly on compression if they did. Alright, now it's time to go ahead and stick those pistons into the block. The biggest trick I have for this is make sure you get your ring compressor sized correctly and that it's holding the rings, you know, nice and compressed. That way they don't pop out and get stuck on the top of the block. The other thing is, you'll notice how I keep looking and moving my hand slightly. I'm trying to orient the piston exactly how it would be with the intake valves, you know, lined up. This way it'll orient the rod into the crank. That way the actual bottom of the rod doesn't hit the crank as you're installing it, because that'll cause it to not go in as well. With this short clip, I couldn't show you all the stuff that I do when I assemble an engine, but if you guys are interested in learning more about that, go ahead and comment below, and then next time I build a motor, I can make a video about it and go into more detail. Alright, check it out. We got the motor all back together. No big deal, just a lot of stuff to bolt on. But now we got to upgrade the car with a new clutch, because the other one, even though it was holding the 300 horsepower, my concern is, you know, in higher gears under a little bit more load, I don't think it's going to do it. So anyway, we called up Competition Clutch and ordered us up one of these guys. This is a stage 4. It's a 4-puck ceramic. I've been with this brand a long time, and I had pretty good luck, I have to say. Even the very first time I had my race car together and didn't have money for a twin disc yet, I ran like a stage 5, which they made me. That was a pretty cool clutch. But for the street, this thing's gonna be pretty dope. Also, you know, if you're worried about clutch feel and you're doing a clutch job, the springs are okay. Honestly, it takes a little shock load off your transmission parts. I feel like the rigid disc stuff, Definitely beats up the inside of the transmission. If you ever took it apart and looked at the synchros, they're way more beat up on a car that didn't have a sprung center hub. So I'm gonna slap this on right now, torque it all down, and align it, switch out the throwout bearing, and go on to the next step, which is setting it back on the cradle over there, and then we can stick it back in the car. Motor sitting on the cradle, we're about ready to go back up into the car. I was just gonna point out, Hunch noticed his motor moves a little bit when we were dynoing. You could kind of like see it rock back and forth. So he went ahead and purchased some motor mounts. Just a thought, if your motor has to come out at any point and you're doing performance related stuff or you're adding horsepower, motor mounts are a really good idea. Nothing makes the car feel better than a good set of mounts. It makes you kind of like feel the road a little bit more, and the motor doesn't smash around and bend things and break things. So anyway, I'm pretty happy. Let's see if this still lines up with that cradle and goes in. I have no idea. I might have to shimmy it around a bit. Hunch, what are you doing in there?
Trying to put the shift light
Hooking up the shift light.
on the gear.
Well, we are just about done. Turn this fan off. We're just about done putting the motor back in, and we're gonna do some other stuff before we go on the dyno. But this is a lot of stuff already in this video. It's getting kind of long, and we need a few more days to get the rest of this done. I can't wait till we get on the dyno, see what this thing will do. But in the next video, part 2, I'll discuss some of the things we had to change in order to make horsepower, because we definitely have some hurdles on the stock car, things that kind of hold you back. We're gonna get those sorted out, show you what we do, and it should be pretty good. Alright guys, till next week.